If you want to follow along today, my scriptures are going to be coming from Acts 6, 8 and until 7:60. 60, yeah. So today I was thinking about Stephen. It actually came up a little bit yesterday in a meeting or a talk I had with some guys on Saturday. But to start with, I was thinking of kind of what Stephen's life kind of embodied. And Stephen is one of those characters that you don't really get a whole lot of backstory on. You don't get what his parents' names were. You don't get did he have siblings? What kind of family did he have? What did he go through as a child? You don't really get those things. You just get a quick little snippet of somebody that was used by God and whose life was changed through this experience of finding out that God and Jesus are just an incredible thing in our lives that we have, that they can change your lives if you let them. So this story is a friend of mine that a guy I grew up with. When he was like 4 or 5, he worked all day long with his dad, and his dad wanted to reward him with like kind of an allowance. And so he gave him $10, and he was just ecstatic that he got $10. And for me, when $10 used to be a lot of money back then, but $5 was like you had some money in the bank, but $10 was a lot. So you were pretty rich. So he was just ecstatic that he had $10. Just walked around all day with that $10 in his hand, and was just super excited that he earned some money. And so his dad was telling this story one day in church, and he said the next day they went to church on Sunday, and his son was still like fiddling with that $10 bill. And when the collection plate went around, he was still fiddling with it. And as soon as that plate got close to him, he goes like that and just threw the money in. And his dad was like, "What?" He's like, "You can't get that money back, son. It was like you worked all day for it. Why are you just throwing it away into the plate?" And he said, "Dad, what better can I do than to give it to God?" And he was just like, "Wow." He said it like broke his heart. He was just like, My little son gets it, but sometimes I don't. Like he gave all that he had in that moment. Yeah. And what more did Stephen do but give all that he had in his life? So my first scripture, the first things you hear about Stephen, comes from Acts 6, verse 8. It says, "Now Stephen, a man of God, full of grace and power, performed great wonders and signs among the people." So my first thing I saw when I was thinking about this verse was a man of God, or Stephen, a man full of God's grace and power. Yeah. Full of God's grace and power. A funny thing is when you have something, like you have a cup of water and it's full, there's not room for anything else. He was full of God's grace and power. So there wasn't room in his life for anything else, any distractions, anything to please himself. He says he was full of God's grace and power. When I meet people, men and women that are full of God's grace and power, like they are different people. They are people that change people's lives. And so Stephen was obviously somebody that was pretty incredible if he was full of God's grace and power and didn't have any of those extra things in his life, but he was full. So going through this chapter, it talks about but people came against him, or he had, it says he had adversaries that came up against him because they didn't like what Stephen was preaching. They didn't like him talking about Jesus, and it started causing trouble with the people that were in charge, the Jewish leaders and the Sanhedrin. They didn't like this. So it says that they couldn't debate against him. They couldn't fight him. And the next verse that follows, chapter 6, verse 10. It says, "But they could not stand up against him, for the wisdom of the Spirit that was given to him that he was speaking." So he was full of wisdom, and they couldn't debate him on what he was talking about because he had such wisdom given to him from God, and he was speaking the truth. It's hard to battle the truth sometimes. When someone has the truth, it's hard to go up against that. And so that's something that Stephen had, is he was speaking the truth, and they couldn't fight him. So it says that they asked people to come against him that spoke lies about him, that said that he was blaspheming the name of God and that he was telling all kinds of lies. And so they arrested him and took him before the Sanhedrin to have him kind of prosecuted because they didn't like what he was all about. And sometimes when we are all about God, and sometimes when we are doing what is right and what God is calling us to do, people aren't always going to like that. People are going to come up against you and say all kinds of evil things against you because the devil doesn't like it when things are going according to God's plan. And so he's going to come up against you if you are full of his grace and power and you are full of the wisdom that God gives you. When you have nothing to distract you, there are going to be times where people are going to come up against you. It's just something that we have in this Christian life that is a truth that people are going to come against us. But we have God on our side. And if God is for us, who can be against us? Yeah. So that's something that Stephen I think embodied in these few chapters that we hear about in his life, that he wasn't deterred by people that came up against him, and that he stood his ground and he fought against them and debated with them, and that he had the truth on his side, that they couldn't do anything but come against him with lies and stuff like that. So going down to the part where he's talking to the Sanhedrin and basically telling them their history. He's saying, guys, I know your history. I know what you've come from. I know all these things about Abraham and the way you were taken out of Egypt. He's like, I know these things, and you know these things. But there's a bitter power than just Moses. Like, our history isn't back with Moses. Our history is going forward with God and with Jesus. And Jesus is this answer that you're looking for. Right. And they didn't like that. And so it says that they got so mad at the story that he was telling them and the message that he was bringing that they gnashed their teeth at him. That's how mad they were, is they gnashed their teeth at him and started yelling. It says they didn't want to hear anymore, and they yelled at the top of their lungs so they didn't have to hear him. And they drug him out, and they started stoning him. Now, you may not be stoned for what you believe in today because you live in America, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be verbally stoned. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to come up against you with stones and try to do whatever they can to get rid of this Jesus that you have, or to destroy your faith, or do whatever it takes to get you to be quiet. But Stephen, in his last moments where he's getting stoned, it says he looked up towards heaven. Well, I'll just read it. It's in chapter 7, verse 60. It says, then he fell on his knees and he cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. And then when he said this, he fell asleep. That is, I was talking to the guys yesterday. I think that's one of the two most powerful verses you can read in the Bible. He's getting stoned to death after trying to help these people, because that's what Stephen was really trying to do, is he was trying to help them, and he was trying to give them this message of Jesus and give them the good news of God. And they started stoning him for it, but he didn't hold it against them, and he asked God not to hold it up against them. Like, that's powerful. Yeah. That they're doing the worst thing possible, trying to kill you for what you believe in, and he didn't want to hold it against them. I think that's so powerful. And I haven't studied this last part about the story, but it says, and then he fell asleep. So I don't know if that means that he just died instantly, or God gave them this blessing of letting him fall asleep in that last moment. I thought that was kind of a cool little part that they put in there. But even though he went through this terrible death, that God was still with him till the end. He still let him see that in that last moment, it says that he was able to see God's glory and see Jesus at the right hand of God. And I thought that was so powerful. So when we think of Stephen and think of these few chapters, all the things that he was full of God's grace and is full of his power and had that wisdom and had that, at the very end, had that compassion for people, that compassion that we all should have for others. Even though we're getting come up against, we still have to have that love and that compassion that only God can give. Because when we show that, that's when other people can see, wow, this guy, he gets it. There's something about him, something about the way he loves us, even though we don't really like this guy. But the way that he is treating us is something different, and that's something I want to have. And so that's kind of what I got out of these chapters when I think of Stephen. So that's it.
Testing, 1, 2. Is this working? We lost the top piece that goes on, the windscreen part, but seems like it's okay. Yeah, I've been reading in Acts 2, also Elijah. And so I have a few things to say there. One of the people that was there, of course, at the stoning of Stephen was a man named Saul. And most of us know that Saul became the Apostle Paul. And it doesn't say much about what was going through Saul's mind there. But I think we can tell from some of Paul's testimony. I believe that Saul was being affected. Sometimes when rough things are happening, we just don't know who's being affected around us. You know, when you're going through things and you're trying to go through it right, you're trying to go through it with the Lord, and it's maybe hard and you feel like you're being persecuted or something like that, or even just anything. When as Christians, when we go through things and we go through them, for lack of better words, with the right heart, right? Still acknowledging Him, still praising God, still considering others. It has a tremendous impact on people. Just like in a small way. One time, I was traveling to Europe to meet these guys to play music, and my flight was canceled, and my gear was lost. And I showed up about half an hour before. I was supposed to get there the day before the first concert, and I showed up there like a half an hour before the concert just in my sweatpants or something. But I just had peace about it. I was just like, well, I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. You know, once you give your life to God and it really belongs to Him, then whatever happens, if it seems adverse, it doesn't seem good, you're just like, well, I belong to you, Lord. Show me what I'm supposed to learn. And I just kind of walked into the dressing room. Hey, how's it going, guys? Well, I guess they borrowed some keyboard. It doesn't have my sounds in it, but I'll do the best I can. And, you know, let's pray. And hallelujah. And there were some of the guys, one of the guys was like, he was really affected by that. He was like, wow, if I was going through what you're going through, I would just be freaking out. And I personally could give some testimonies about things times I've seen people go through tremendous adversity with that peace of God, with that, you know, counseling others in the midst of, you know, it's like, wow. And it has really affected me. So never lose sight of that. As you were speaking about Stephen, and I have some thoughts about the Apostle Paul. I guess I'll just go right to that part of it. Acts, and he talks about this many times. By the way, don't ever get tired of giving your testimony. Paul gives it 3 times in the book of Acts, right? He gives it before Felix, and he gives it in, you know, Acts 8 and Acts, you know, it's all over the place. So don't get tired of that. So Paul, the Apostle Paul, is giving his testimony to a great king, and he's in chains, and he's basically telling the story about how, I was the guy that was, persecuting Christians, and that I was commissioned to do that, and he was very zealous about it. So he says in Acts 26:12-18, while thus occupied, this must be King James. While thou and thus were occupied. While thus occupied, as I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priests. That must have felt good. Right? I mean, if you had authority and commission from the highest people, right? And you're riding out there with your men and you're in charge, man. That must have felt pretty good as a man, right? I'm such a man. Men like these things. The ladies are like, what are you talking about? The men probably can relate to that. On the road, so authority and commission from the chief priests at midday, O king, along the road. So it's midday. So it's bright out. Along the road, I saw a light from heaven brighter than the sun, like right in the middle of the day, shining around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground. So it's such an experience, it knocks them off their horse. I like that picture. Sometimes, man, we need the Lord to knock us off our horse. Like whatever we're doing, the stuff that we're using as a vehicle, maybe. Sometimes God's got to knock us off of that. We're relying too much on those things. He's got to get us down where He can use us, right? So there they all are, all on the ground. I heard a voice speaking to me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Another translation says kick against the pricks, meaning God is, I think of it like, like the cattle prod, or I don't know, I always think of it as a cactus or something. It's like sticking. It's because there's this crazy old German song that I learned a long time ago from my brother called Mein kleiner grüner Kaktus, which means my little green cactus. And the end of the verse goes, I hold ich meine Kaktus and I stich. Means stick. It's a very strange song. Anyway, so that's how I think of it. But what's happening is that God is pricking His conscience. And I think while that stoning of Stephen was going on, Saul's there, but God's trying to turn him. And look at how hard it is. How hard it is to not do the will of God. It's hard to fight the will of God. It seems like it's easier, right? It seems like it's easier to stay home, and live our lifelong ambition to just like lay in the bathtub and eat bonbons, right? All of our plans, this actually I'm going to get to planning for what's next, but most of our plans are based on gathering so then we can lay around, right? Like, all right, like our highest goal is to get to the place where we don't have to do anything. My son Will has been planning his retirement since he was 13. He's been thinking about what he's going to do, and the great day when he doesn't have to do anything and he can just play Zelda for the rest of his life. He's a very accomplished young man. I'm teasing him. But, a lot of times our plans are based around those kinds of things. But if we'll step into God's plans, if we'll step into that thing that's like, yeah, but I know I'm wanting to relax. I know I'm wanting to stay home. But God's prodding at me like, it would be really good if you did X. Or, really. And sometimes it's even our heart's desire. Like, I love to write music. It's one of my favorite things to do. And sometimes He starts pricking my heart about 3:30 in the morning. And I'm like, can you give it to me later? One of those times was when I wrote Cradle to the Grave. The Lord woke me up at 3 a.m. and I didn't want to get up, because we want to stay comfortable. But if we will surrender to the will of God and not keep fighting against it, I feel like some of us are really fighting against the will of God, that we feel tugging on us. Maybe some of us, for some of us, it's clearer than others. Let me go on. So it's hard for you to kick against these jabbings, these cattle proddings, these cactus stickings. So I said, "Who are you, Lord?" And he said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Wow. So when Saul is persecuting these people that are following Jesus, Jesus says he's persecuting him. That's how close we want to be with our Lord, right? I want to be that close to him, that he thinks of me as him. Imagine that. Wow. I am Jesus, who you are persecuting. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness both of the things which you have seen and of the things which I will yet reveal to you. This is for you. A lot of these things we read, we think, oh, well, that's a nice story about this guy in ancient history, right? But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose. I believe God has appeared to each one of us in Jesus Christ by the Spirit for a purpose. For a purpose. Back to discovery. Our part, and the exciting part, if you choose to accept it, is the discovery of that ongoingly. It's not static. It doesn't stay the same. Right? How do we know that from the scriptures all over the place, right? Peter has been taught all his life. Another story from Acts. Peter's been taught all his life, don't eat this stuff. This is unclean. Don't dine with these people. They are unclean. God says, that's all changed. Rise, slay and eat. It was a different day. And then we go back to the story of Abraham and Isaac. Remember? He says, sends him up to sacrifice his son, and at the last minute, he stays his hand. We've got to be in tune with the ongoing will of God. But he has appeared to you for a purpose. And I love this part about the things that he will yet reveal to you. All the things that he had yet to reveal, all the stuff that happens with the Apostle Paul. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's practically the whole book of Acts. And what things does he have yet to reveal to you and to me? I mean, he's revealing things about himself and who he is, and about the people around me too, and my purpose in the world. And the revelation of God goes on. It goes on. Let's not stay where we are. What's next? What's next is moving on in the Lord. Where was I here? I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you. What? What? That sounds like a lot of fun. Wow, send this, pretty crazy Jewish zealot to the Gentiles. I'm sure that he didn't think of that as a good time. To open their eyes in order to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God. In our time, I think we think that most people are doing pretty good. I don't think most of the time that we're really aware of the darkness that is all around us. I think, we'll read that and go oh yeah, they were all real messed up back then. It's a good thing God had to send Paul to go deal with them. Well, What's going on in our time? What's going on underneath our time of, oh, I don't know. It appears to be a time of relative wealth, I guess you'd say. People kind of have a lot in our world, anywhere in America. I think most people seem to be doing okay. So, and they'll tell you they're doing great. Doesn't everybody? Do you ever talk to anybody who says, you ask them how's it going? They don't. Doesn't everybody say good? Everybody, except you, right? But right. But most people are like doing great, doing good. Maybe they are, but honestly, do you think they really are? With all the anxiety and all the trouble that people are really in. I mean, if you get, you don't have to scratch the surface very far usually to find out that people really need the Lord, right? They need the gospel. God needs you. Like Uncle Sam. I want you. God needs you to minister to a world that's in darkness just like this, in order to turn them from darkness to the light. And it doesn't have to be so dramatic. You know what I mean? This story is very dramatic. They're knocked to the ground. They're riding on their horses. They've got their swords. They're going to go throw these guys in jail. And suddenly it's like, oh, don't throw them in jail. Go preach the gospel of Jesus to them. Whoa, that's very dramatic, right? But many times in our lives, what is God calling you to next? You know, sometimes it's a variety of things. So that's really between you and the Lord. And our part as co-Christians with you is to just try to help you to discover what that is. And only the Lord knows, and it's a unique thing for you. There was a time in my walk when what was next, what I felt was write a book. I don't know how to write a book. Whoa, really? Write a book. Somebody came and suggested it to me that I write a book about my testimony, but I don't know how to do that. You know, a lot of times the will of God is going to seem weird to you. You know, don't look for what fits you. Like if you're looking for a mate, don't look for what you think. Because a lot of times what we think is miles away from what God has for you. Right? I mean, I love my wife and she knows that. She's like, oh God, what's he going to say? But, you know, I the things that I had on my list that I thought I wanted somebody really artistic because I'm artistic. I had things on my list that I wanted, and then my heart said yes to Sherry, and I was kind of like, well, she doesn't have any those things. I mean, she likes like AM radio music. She's not going to understand me, you know. But God knows what he's doing. God knows, and he brought me to a place where I was ready to accept what he said. The church that he sent me to did not fit me at all. It was like super old-fashioned, you know. I thought, well, you know, if I find a church, I should find a rockin' church. One of those, you know, where they have the guitars really low. I did. I was looking for what fit me. Don't look for what fits you. Conform to the image of his Son. Let him conform you to his will. This is where all the great stuff is. Yes, we submit our will to you today, Lord. Back to the Apostle Paul. We're here today partly because he was obedient. He became the apostle to the Gentiles. Aren't you glad that Paul was obedient? But look at what he does. This is a really critical thing. Okay, there's a knock at my door. And I open it up. This is this guy from Bowling Green that I don't know that well, didn't know that well. He says, he was kind of a really interesting guy, very intense guy, you know. He got really kind of close to me and said, the Lord told me to come here. I'm like, okay, come on in. Uh-oh, what's going to happen? And he says to me with big eyeballs, he said, I feel like the Lord is saying, you need to know what your calling is. He sent me to tell you, you need to know what your calling is. And he referenced these scriptures, and he said, when the Apostle Paul met the Lord on the road to Damascus, the first thing he says is, Lord, Lord, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And he suggested that I pray that prayer. And he left, and I was like, wow, that was something. Wasn't expecting that today. But I started to pray that prayer, and I realized the reason why I didn't, and I think the reason why a lot of us don't pray that prayer, Lord, Lord, what do you want me to do, is because if we get an answer, then we'll feel like we have to do it. It's like it'd be better not to know. Ignorance is bliss, right? Lord, you can say, Lord, I didn't know, right? But once you know, well, then you need to operate in that. And so I was walking and praying, and I felt like, and it was not like a thunderbolt thing. It wasn't, I wouldn't describe it like he describes that at all. I was praying, Lord, Lord, well, what do you want me to do? And it was just the still small voice of God just said, preach the gospel. But it was in a sort of ordinary way, like, preach the gospel. That's what I want everybody to do. That was my feeling. It wasn't like some super unique thing. He wants us all to preach the gospel in our way. So I then asked how and where, and then that led us to do our ministry in Europe. And, I kept praying because I felt like we needed help. And, I prayed about it, and I felt like I felt something about Todd. But I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. He doesn't even sing. I was looking for somebody to sing harmonies with me. We have our ideas about what people need, and and I also thought, well, Todd's not like a fiery preacher. They need some fire over there. Those people are kind of like they're dead spiritually. We need somebody to fire them up, right? And Todd's he's a very calm speaker. And I've talked about this before. So Todd finally starts coming because he feels it too. So God puts us together to do this thing. And, I'm the praiser. I'm the excited guy. You probably gathered that by now. So somebody put us on fast forward from one of the services. And so I'm like this. And Todd's like this. Because he's speaking like this, and he's gathering, But the people really responded and were so blessed by his words and his spirit, And we just learned. See, what was happening? I was discovering. I was learning more and more about God's perfect will. And really, it all comes down to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, doesn't it? I mean, do you feel directionless sometimes? This is the beginning of the year. Some of us are maybe looking for an empowered direction. Maybe we don't want to just keep doing the same stuff, feel like you're in a rut or something like that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. This is very famous verses. Most of us know these. But I think it's all in here. If we'll do this, we will be so blessed. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, right? With your whole heart. And don't listen to your own mind. It's really hard. Just those two lines, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding, is not as easy as it sounds. Because when stuff doesn't make any sense to you, and you feel like the Lord's saying, no, do this, go this way, and it's not lining up with what you think, there's the rub. That's when you and God are rubbing up against it. And then you got to choose. And you're always going to have that choice because he made you with free choice. In all your ways, acknowledge him in everything you do. It means, so we make these decisions, right? We feel like God's pulling us this way. And so we start going that way. But, God's not, he's not every moment going to say, oh, you're on the right path. Oh, yeah, do this. Or, it's not really like that. It's a walk of faith, right? You'll get a word. You'll get, the Spirit will move you, from time to time, but not in every instance, right? And so in all your ways, so while you're going that way, you're acknowledging him, you're praying, you're getting up early, you're praying and you're asking him, and you're acknowledging him, and you're reading the scriptures, and you're looking and you're seeking. This is about seeking after him with all your heart. In all your ways, acknowledging him, and he will make straight your paths. He will, in other translation, it says that he will direct your paths. He will give you that direction that you're looking for. If you're looking for direction today, he will give it. He will keep his promise and direct your paths. And sometimes we don't know. We look back and go like, wow, I had no clue. But now I can see. Now I can see that you were directing the whole thing the whole time. And I believe if we ask him more specifically to show us what our calling is, he will do it. He will show us better and more perfect ways to love and serve him. And like the Apostle Paul, when he gets knocked off his horse, he stands there in a portal of light and immediately says, Lord, Lord, what do you want me to do? I'm asking you to pray about that at the beginning of this year. People ask me about the vision for the church and the direction for the church. And I say, well, I'm not the church. We're praying about it. We're praying together about it. I have my ideas. I have my vision, but I would ask you to pray, not just for your own personal direction from the Lord, but also for the direction of the church and how we can work together in even greater ways and fulfill on our great calling from God. And I feel like I should sit down and see if anybody else has anything else that they would like to add. We do that from time to time.
We're good. So I was thinking about your experience with God telling you your calling when you were searching for him. And I was thinking about my experience when I was about 17. And I was really on fire for God. I had a lot of inspiration, and I was seeking his will for my life. And I remember, asking God, I was like, okay, what is it that you want me to do? And I didn't hear anything. And I just kept praying it. And it was for about, 6 weeks of me just continuously just praying this prayer. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? One day, I was getting cleaned up before I was heading out to church. And I was just meditating on it. And nobody else was in the house. I don't know if they already left or something like that, but whatever it was, I was by myself. And so I was singing at the top of my lungs and just singing some songs. And a song I started singing was, I don't know if you've heard it before, This Is My Story, This Is My Song, Praising My Savior All the Day Long. And I was just singing those words, and I was really getting blessed by it. And I felt Lord just dropping on my heart. Said, that's your calling. And I was like I was really blessed at that time, just like, oh man, he answered me. But at the same time, I was like, it was just so simple. It was just like, praising you. And I'm glad you mentioned that today, because it reminded me that I have been following that calling to my fullest. And I want to be following that calling because we all have gifts that God has blessed us with. Amazing gifts, each and every single one of us. God has blessed me for whatever reason, not because I'm a great person, but just whatever it is I've been gifted with, of just honestly, naturally just being happy and thankful for most situations. And it's a blessing. It's not like it's anything I've really had to work for. But we're just thankful, thinking about God. Thank you for bringing back to my mind my calling that you've called me to. And sometimes we may stray off our path, like myself, that we want to realign ourselves. Where are you at? Where am I going to? Yeah. And along the path, who am I going to be blessing? And it's simple. It's simple. And God leads me along the way to different things. But I'm really thankful for a lot of things that he's done for my life. I'd like to praise him for the good in my life, for a wife who has stood by me for almost 4 years this week, and that has loved me. And I'm thankful for being at a church where I could be with my family and my friends. I'm so thankful for his mercies are new every day. Yeah. I'm so thankful for the good things he's brought my life, that I'm able to know him, that I've been able to grow up and know God, that I could have his peace in my life, that I can know his ways in my life, and I can have his word, and I have his word deeply in my heart that I fall back on, that I don't even have to work on some things because they were stored so deeply in my heart at a young age and just in a culture. I mean, how much of a blessing is that? That I could see something that stands out to me is at Jada's wedding, the band that came there, that they said, man, look at all these people, these couples who are still out here, still married. I'm blessed that I can know this many people that have stood it out and learned how to love each other that long, and not just to the bitter end. And I'm so blessed. There's so many things I look at, Lord, thank you. And I don't want to shield myself from the goodness and just look at all the tough things and just look at all the rotten. There are some people that I know as patients that I have as I work at a pharmacy, and it's very, very sad to see some lives that have almost no capacity to reach out and see any good or any sparkle. It's of any shimmer of any possible hope, and it's so depressing, and no one wants to be around them, but it's really sad. I mean, but God, thank you. Every opportunity that I can, I want to renew that to him. God, I'm thankful. And it's not just a calling for my life. It's not a calling, the calling like God put on you, preach the gospel. Well, it sounds generic, but really it's a big calling. It's a big calling, preach God's gospel, to the good news to everybody else. And as my calling, God, help me to be praising you all the day long through everything that I encounter. That includes the bad, not just the good things that have happened to me. Thank you, God, for whatever bad thing my mind is blanking, but it doesn't matter. Whatever difficulty I'm encountering at that time, thank you, God. This is an opportunity for me to know myself better. It's for an opportunity for me to realize where my weaknesses may lie, and maybe you can, and this opportunity for you to help me grow and know you better and your ways better. Right. So not just being thankful for the goodness he's brought in my life, but the thankfulness of him showing maybe through the difficulty some of the things that you want to give over to him, and maybe something that I want to give over to him, that I want to be more like him. Yeah. And I just want to say I'm thankful. I'm really, really thankful today for his words in my heart, his words in my life. And just I'm thankful for what the future is going to hold with him.
Yeah, there have been a lot of inspiring things that have made me think of things that things I've been thinking of. It's always exciting. I'm sure Neal felt very inspired. I don't know that Neal called you and told you what he was going to talk about or what he was feeling on his heart. But whenever you feel a connection in something, it gives you this like deeper sense that, hey, maybe I'm on the right track here. God's dealing with other people on a thought. A lot of times God does deal with many people in certain situations. I've talked to people that maybe were in different services and things along that line, and there might be a message that was very, very similar, that was very special, and found out that someone else was feeling that same inspiration. Right. So while God is a God of uniqueness with each individual in the way that he talks to us and deals with us, at the same time, he seems to have to work in patterns and in ways very general across lots of people, many people. And I thought I'd just relay this experience because what you experience will help you to understand what you know or what you think you know. So as you have concepts and things in your mind, you begin to think about things and you're working things out and trying to figure out concepts. How reality in your life plays out begins to shape those concepts into different ways. I don't know if you've ever experienced something like that. I'm sure many people have. Is you start thinking maybe about a concept or something's kind of catching your attention, and you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. What an interesting thought. And then you find out all of a sudden you're in the middle of it. I know that that's something that Neal has experienced. I know it's something that I've experienced, almost like my thought process was preparing me for something that I was going to go through. And I think a lot of times God deals with us in those ways when we're meditating and we're thinking on him, that he does prepare our minds more than we even realize for the situations that he wants to bring us through, so that we can grow through those things. Too many times people think about the challenges and the tests of life, like, you've maybe heard people say, sorry, I'm not trying to like get anybody behind the pole. If there was a way to erect a beam down through here, I'd love to do it and remove that pole. Yeah. So I'm trying to see if I can stand here and get everybody. But a lot of times, as we're going through things, and we're going through this process of God dealing with us and bringing us into some kind of deeper relationship, a lot of times those concepts will challenge our thinking, and they'll reveal things in us concepts that maybe we've built a lot on that are not really correct. And that's getting back to where I think I see the caboose now. Getting back to that thought that I was saying is, a lot of times people will view things that we go through. You'll hear this expression, well, I hope I go through this right this time so I don't have to go through it again. Like as if God just has a bunch of questions for you and you need to get the right answer. And so if you don't get the right answer, you get to start back over at the top of the test. And I don't really think that that's what God's intention is for the things that we go through. Actually, we will find as we're sometimes feeling like we're heading in circles in situations, like, man, am I going through this again? That really what's happening is, slowly as we're going through experiences, our concepts are changing and we keep hitting the same things, but God keeps elevating our thinking to be conformed more to his thinking. So I had this experience that I said all that to get to this. I had this experience. I was raised in a really good community, and it was so tight as a community that I almost viewed things on the outside of that community as not really part of my community. They were associations, interactions, things along that line. The community was extremely tight. There were a lot of great things. I mean, I had a lot of good friends there. I was listening to a lot of Bible scriptures and deep talks, and I cried I spoke in tongues. I did whatever. I was feeling inspiration too. And people were like, yeah, Todd's in there. I had my issues growing up like everybody else, but I was always there and I was always participating in some way. When I got into my 40s, I think I'm not really good with dates or times. I do remember my birthday, but that's about it. Everything else just kind of is all mixes together after I've experienced it. But I did come to a period of time, I think it was in my early 40s, that and through some of these experiences, like God dealing with me, Neal mentioned to me, he said, hey, I've been praying, and I'm feeling you. And I was like, let God call me brother.
Exactly what he said.
Yeah, I said, I'm not going on somebody else's inspiration from God. But what was really funny is, not getting into the specifics or something, but one of my sons, my youngest son, came to me in that period of time, and he started sharing me this dream he had about Neal. And it was kind of an odd dream, and I don't think it was really necessarily had any literal application, but it affected my heart in a way that I felt like, you know what, maybe God is dealing with me, that I should go and I should step out. And I didn't, and even in going, it was bizarre to me going, okay, and talking to people and those things. It was challenging a lot of concepts that were very foundational in my upbringing and my experience. But as I started going through those things, I started feeling God actually begin to interact with me in a personal way. Now, it wasn't like he was sitting on my bedpost or speaking, or I was hearing audible voices, Todd, But I could recognize there were thoughts and things that were pricking my heart. And at times when I was asking questions, that I could feel like God was responding to me. Or if I would pray in those periods of time and go, God, would you just show me today something about you? Could I just see you in some way today? And man, I'm telling you, I would not get through the end of the day and something would happen. I would go, that was God. And so I started having this like interactive thing. And I don't even know if it's as interactive now as it is then. I don't understand what the whole purpose. I'm sure God has a purpose in trying to pull us away from being too dependent on seeing everything and step into a feeling and letting him trust, this greater trust. But I was trying to explain it at times to people in my community that I had grown up with. And I could only put it like this. I could say, all I can say is the things I'm experiencing, it's like I didn't really know God. And it really troubled people. I don't know if you remember that period of time. People would they'd be like, well, wait a minute. No, we saw you down front. We saw you crying and calling out to God. And we know that this is in your life. And you've been dependable and you've been here and all these things. And I'm like, I know, I'm not wanting to discredit that. All I'm telling you is some way, I'm experiencing God in some way that I didn't know was really possible. Because it wasn't a core concept in my community of that. As I saw that, there were good things that I experienced as a group. But I'm telling you, some of the most meaningful experiences, some of them were all by myself. Some of them had nothing to do with anyone, or where I found myself in a position with people I didn't even know. Along that line. It was something about God revealing himself. And I thought about as we were singing this original song, to God be the glory. Everything that transpires and everything that happens, if God doesn't really receive the glory for those things, then it's not really, and its glory, probably in their terms, it would be something different than, as culture changes and words change, glory might look a little different today in God's, vernacular is that God would receive the credit. It's the glory because we could call it glory because it's good credit, right? But it's not so much about just accolades. It's that God gets the credit. That when anything that we do, if it becomes too, it's like soup. Okay? There's lots of ingredients that go into soup, right? Right? But if I take 5 heads of garlic and I crush them up and, mince them, whatever, and I put them in soup, doesn't matter whether I'm not saying cloves, I'm saying heads. Okay? 5 heads of garlic in any soup is going to be what? Garlic soup, right? Doesn't matter if it has a tomato base or a potato base or chili. It's going to be garlic soup, okay? Anything that is too strong will dominate. Would you agree? That's why as God uses each one in our lives, God may use you in a very powerful way with somebody's life, but it will probably be small. Because and in fact, God uses you in ways that are not so potent, it can be a lot more involved on your part. Because if we become too strong in the situation, then we become clouded with where is God and who am I? Is this just me? And I think sometimes that's why God is trying to get us to, Jesus was saying things like, do these things in secret. When you give charity, don't let the left hand know what the right hand's doing. As soon as you do things in a way that people recognize it's you doing it, who gets the credit? But when somebody receives something that they don't know where it came from and nobody wants the credit, who gets the credit? God does. So in our journey in these things, I'm here. I really like everybody here. I've received a lot of good from everyone here. But in my hardest moments in life, in the greatest challenges I've faced, it's been God who is the one that has kept me. He's comforted me with other people and they provided, and I appreciated that. But I've never lost sight of, I could never go through some of the things I have if it wasn't the Spirit of God dwelling with me. So I love this idea of our interaction and our support for one another to empower us and give us the confidence that we can follow in God's footsteps, that we can allow Him to lead us and pull back your expectations in a very specific way and let your expectations open up into a very broad way where anything, if I define what God can do in my life, if I draw a box around that, you know what can happen? God can be working all around that box trying to get my attention. And I'm so focused on this little area of, what's he going to do in there? Okay, what's going to happen? And God's all over the place, working. Yeah. I really believe that if God has any question for humanity, when we get there, He's going to go, okay, what's the box you guys are always talking about? I just don't get that. So, because those things don't limit God, and they don't limit you. And so as much as anyone might participate and interact and share their thoughts, do not let yourself, and this is just my feelings, don't let yourself fall into that situation that we're so prone to do that start kind of like saying, okay, well, this guy's here. This guy's kind of here spiritually. This guy's kind of here spiritually. I'll listen to this guy up here. Wait, no, it's he who has an ear. Let him hear. The responsibility of hearing God is not the person speaking to you. The responsibility of hearing God is with you. If the heart wants to hear God, you will hear Him. He will speak to you. But you can't define where that's going to come from. And the more you look at someone else and say, they're just more spiritual, I can't really do that. They're called to a higher calling in some way. The more you're limiting the way God wants to use you. Right. There's a tremendous amount of ability that God has assembled even with us as a group right here. And He could probably do it with many groups, but you can see it. But wherever we're falling short, wherever we are inadequate, God has created us that way so that He can make up that difference. Yes. So that we can believe and understand that it is God that is actually doing the work through us. Because we know that we fall short, that we have weakness, That was the beauty of the thought. You know, you mentioned Stephen, and when you were starting out, if you read in the first part of Acts, what does it say? It says the 12 said, hey, you know what? I mean, we shouldn't be waiting on tables. We need to be in the Word of God. Okay? Get some guys to wait on the tables. Two of those guys, Stephen and Philip, they're pinnacles of what is going on in the book of Acts. It was actually Philip that goes down and evangelizes all of Samaria. Philip, the table guy.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Somehow, Stephen, in all of his table work, had a pretty deep understanding of the scriptures. This guy was maybe not recognized for his theological abilities at that period of time, but God used him in an incredible way.
Absolutely.
To deal with it. And do not limit God. You can think, well, I'm limiting myself. No, you're limiting God if anything isn't on the table. And that kind of community will produce something, I believe, that will impact all of our other community around us. That God does, He puts us in families, but don't let there become lines somehow between where you are now and everything that's going on around you. Because in God's eyes, I believe community encompasses everything. I think, and I'll end with this thought, I think that if Jesus today, if we were to ask Jesus, well, who's my community? I think he'd tell us the story of the Good Samaritan.